Okay, we are about time. Good morning, everyone. I'm Shantanu Chakraborty, working as a research fellow at this college. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and to pay my respect to elders past and present. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Teoh from SIMEC ZEN Energy, who is here with us today for sharing his presentation on Australia's world-leading shift to battery storage. In particular, he will explain these fundamental drives behind the Australian emergence as the exciting and global playground for the electricity in system transformation. So Teoh is the head of engineering at the SIMEC ZEN Energy, a disruptive renewables source retailers backed by Professor Ross Granat and Sanjeev Gupta's GFG Alliance. Terry has had significant career in renewable energy with large corporates, including responsibility for Pacific Hydro's Australian development function. So please join me welcoming Terry. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shantanu, and welcome everyone. I'll start macro in Australia, and then I'll come down to what it means for your house and for your business, more in a commercial and market outlook sense than a technical sense. And then for grid batteries, I'll start macro globally, and then I'll come down to what that means for Australia. So there should be a few slides there which are technical to satisfy your inner geek, and given we're at the transition hub, perhaps for some of you to satisfy your outer geek. Okay, just a bit of a background on SIMEC ZEN Energy. ZEN had humble beginnings in 2004 in Adelaide as a residential solar install company, and around 2014, Professor Ross Garnaut, whom many of you may know, thought deeply about what climate change meant for changes to the global economy, and as macroeconomists have a tendency to do, and realized that Australia's abundance of high-quality renewable resources would give it a new comparative advantage in a climate-transformed world order. So he set about looking at initiatives that would set Australia on this pathway towards a transformed energy superpower. And that culminated in merging of his private company's interests with SIMEC. And then a few years later, and very recently, Mr. Sanjeev Gupta of the Gupta Family Group Alliance, self-made Anglo-Indian billionaire, had much the same vision, but was on a pathway which was to acquire distressed energy-intensive assets globally, steel, aluminum manufacturing, backing his judgment that if you repowered these assets with the underlying low-cost base of renewables over the long term, that you could restore the manufacturing competitiveness of these assets, create value, and put them back on the world stage instead of seeing these dying industries closing. He did that in the UK recently with British Steel, where he has a smelter in Scotland that's powered with renewable energy. He bought the Weiler Steelworks, which went into voluntary administration 2 years ago now. And along with that, sought to find a company with a compatible vision, powering these industries renewable energy, and quickly found his way to Professor Garnaut, and that resulted in the merging of interests with Mr. Gupta taking a majority stake in ZEN. So today, in 2008, we're a high-growth, renewable-sourced electricity retailer to large industrial customers, and it is a breakout model which the large incumbent retailers who control 80% of the market cannot easily replicate it. So we're backing our view of the future of a transformed world powered with renewable energy. And in a sense, we're putting what the Energy Transition Hub is doing in research industry collaboration into practice, which is coupling renewable energy to export manufacturing. And I'm also pleased to acknowledge that Professor Ross Garnaut, who is the president of SIMEC ZEN and also chair of the Transition Hub, is in our company today. Okay, so as I said, we're going to do Australian macro and then what it means for your house and for your business. So what are those macros? So we have a geographically vast and skinny grid. It stretches 5,000 kilometers from the top of Cape York all the way through to Ceduna in South Australia. And it's not got a lot of load hanging on it for such a long network, which means it requires quite a bit of careful control to maintain the stability of the system. We have a unique real-time electricity market. It clears every 5 minutes and it settles every 30 minutes. And from a year and a half from now, it'll settle every 5 minutes. There are other markets around the world which are heading in that direction, but they're not quite as real-time as this market is. We have a radically changing generation mix, and what we see is the retirement of aged coal thermal generators. We see Australia, the eastern seaboard, exporting LNG as of 3-4 years ago now, and that means that gas, which is used for power generation domestically, becomes exposed to global pricing. And that has resulted in the cost of gas moving from $2 to $3 a gigajoule to somewhere north of $7 to $8 a gigajoule. And so that means the way we use gas generation in the energy mix changes, and it becomes a premium fuel for those times when the prices are sufficiently high to sustain those units being turned on. We see the rise of renewables with South Australia now generating close to half of its annual energy from wind and solar, and the other jurisdictions not far behind. We see the rise of the prosumer, and Australia's uptake of residential solar is amongst the highest in the world. And once again, South Australia at somewhere around 30% of households, it's the highest in the world. And what has enabled some of this is what we call the digitization of the grid. And this is the use of the internet and software, which you see most evidently in the smartphone that you carry around. But there's no reason to believe why every other part of society and the economy will not be profoundly changed but by this effect of digitization. And you see it in healthcare, you see it in your car, you see it in the way you procure peer-to-peer services, the way you connect with your friends, it's everything. And so this is happening in electricity as well. And what it's enabling us to do is, instead of generating power from a big chugging power station and sending it out to centers of demand for which we are blind, and therefore we have to manage a surplus on the generation side to cover for unexpected changes in demand. Now we know we can place demand across thousands or hundreds of thousands of points. We can have two-way flow, and we can move from blind to aware. And so your solar system behind your house, and in future your battery, will be able to mimic and provide services interactively back into the grid to rebalance the grid in a new way. And that's what I mean by digitization. So what do these drivers mean for Australia? Well, globally, there are many markets that have some of these features, but Australia is really the only market that has all of these features. And so that makes us the interesting playground for a lot of other countries to watch what happens here, because we become the harbinger of that really exciting energy transformation. Okay. So I'll drop down into residential batteries then. So what we have is, most of the data and graphs you'll see on these slides come from public domain sources, and I have generally referenced those sources at the bottom of the slide. We have a high momentum, globally significant market. For batteries, in 2016, we had around 6,000 to 7,000 households take it up, so it's an early adopter market. And in 2017, around 20,000 units. And there, if you look at the split by jurisdiction, you can see that SA is an outperformer just on a crude measure of proportioning to population at 11% of the battery market share against holding 7% of the population. And New South Wales is also. Queensland is about on par. And what's holding Queensland back is that there were very generous solar premium feed-in tariffs that have a long-dated sunset going into the 2020s, and that for those customers who are the first uptakers, natural first uptakers of batteries, they would quite sensibly wish to stay on their premium feed-in tariff, let that wash out, and then they come into contention for batteries. And then Vic, you can see here is on this data anyway, the laggard, but with the Victorian Labor government showing policy leadership through both solar and battery programs announced recently, that's set to change. So let's look at what's fueling that growth then. We talked about the macro and then more locally. Well, a range of good products that are available. Tesla, Sonnen, SolarEdge. I don't work for any of those companies. And they're sort of in the 10, even sub $10,000 range. So they're a bit outside of a sort of credit card purchase, but then they're not far off for, for wealthier households. Costs will continue to fall, and there's an 8% learning curve on batteries, meaning that for every doubling of global production capacity, the cost of a battery will fall by 8%. And I'll show you a bit more data around that shortly. It's a well-regulated industry where we've had 10 years of or more of residential solar deployments now. There's accreditation schemes, there's good expertise out there in the install. There are codes of practice, but both industry self-administered and government imposed, and that's a good thing. We also have a nascent battery recycling industry here in Australia through the Australian Battery Recycling Initiative. And that comes out predominantly from automotive, EV, and I guess prospectively a view on the growth in battery deployments will mean that the recycling industry is not far behind. Okay, what are some of the impediments then? Well, Australian code lags behind Europe. So that system in the photo there, you can put in your living room in Europe. In Australia, you're not allowed to do that at present. It has to be outdoors on one hand, yet this system is not weatherproof because it was designed in Europe. So therefore, if you buy this system, you then have to put it in the shed or put an extra enclosure around that. So that will get resolved, hopefully. And then the other sort of impediments are obviously there are dwelling sort of site constraints. If you do have to stick the battery outside, but you live in a terrace house with 1.2 meters down your walkway, then you need to be able to shuffle past it. So there's practical things that do come into play. And of course, renters and apartments at present are somewhat stranded because, and that's 30% of Australians now live in this class segment. So they're currently locked out from making a purchase, either because of the split incentive. So why would the landlord invest in a battery which confers a benefit which the tenant captures? But the digitization of the grid is also creating new kinds of software packaging that would address that split incentive. And for apartment dwellers, likewise, the body corp really isn't traditionally set up to allow common solar generation. But once again, we are seeing a trend where there are apartment blocks who are able to do this using new technology tools. Here's one then for the geeks. This is a house which has an average daily consumption of about 2.5 to 3 kilowatt hours. So that's very low against the Australian average of about 15 to 20 kilowatt hours. It has a big beefy solar array of 5 kilowatts. So at 4 sun hours taken through the year, that would produce 20 kilowatt hours per day. So roughly 8 times the production of what the house natively consumes. So it's primarily an export-dominated house. And this is the day in the life of that house seen through the battery storage unit. So here at 8 a.m. you see the solar umbrella producing through to about 5 in the afternoon. The battery state of charge starts around 20%. The controller prioritizes refilling the battery, that's shown in that green there, and the battery reaches full by about 11 in the morning. And then the rest of that solar is prioritized to meeting house load, except this is a house where the occupants are absent most of the day. So instead, this juice here gets exported at 11 cents a kilowatt hour. And then in the evening, when the occupants come home, the dark purple here is the battery having harvested its solar energy, now reusing that solar energy to cover the nighttime load. And then running through here is just the very low standing load of the house, primarily the fridge. Okay.
What's the SOC?
State of charge. So that's the fuel tank for the battery, where 100% is full. Yep, thank you for that. So these are the metrics that are common for household with solar and batteries. So what we call self-consumption there is the proportion of the solar harvest that's used by the house versus what's sent out for export. So there, the annual average is probably less than what's shown here in this snapshot. It's probably around 20%. So as I said, it's an export-focused household. And the graph below is what we call self-production. And what that means is how much of my load is met with solar. And it shows 85%. In reality, it's at 100%. But for the battery needing a parasitic load draw from the grid to keep it up and running, and it's only visible in this house because it's at a very low consumption. On a more normal sized house, then that pie chart would essentially show 100% grid independence from a consumption point of view. This house takes the view, and I can say that because it happens to be my house in Brunswick East, that it's not about grid defection. Doing this philosophically, staying connected onto the grid while having energy independence, staying on the grid is good. The grid is good, it's just that we would use it in a different way in the future, right? How can I share my exported solar with you? And as I have the grid as a means to transfer that energy, okay? Right. So wrapping up the residential piece, how am I doing for time? 15 past, 20 past?
Yeah, 20 minutes.
Okay, good, thank you. The primary use for the battery is to harvest your solar and reuse it in the evenings. That'll give you, for the solar only, it'll give you a payback for around 5 years. For the battery only in 2018, if you're adding that to solar that you've already sunk a few years ago, then you're looking at 9 to 10 year payback for the retrofit case. That'll come down. Bundled, if you don't have either and you're investing in both at the same time, then you're looking at payback of around 7 years. And if you wish to have backup, then that doesn't generally come as a standard feature. It's like buying your Holden. If you want the mag wheels and the turbo, you pay extra for that. So same with batteries. They're designed for online use, and if you want the backup facility, then you pay for that accessory. Okay, just be aware of that. Yep. So for people who are grid connected, the notion would be, well, if the grid fails, surely I can use the battery to continue supplying power. And there's several ways that you can do that. Upon loss of grid, generally, the battery's got remaining charge in it, and that may be enough to keep you running for 2 or 3 hours until City Power comes out and repairs the wires in the street. And that'll keep your fridge, your lights, your Wi-Fi router running to give you some amenity, but not as if you were living in an off-grid house.
Do you have a feel for the impact of having an EV that you're refueling on that payback case?
Yep. So that will improve the payback case generally, because the more load you can bring into the house and schedule it, then the economics generally improve with the size of the dwelling, roughly. But it would depend quite carefully on when you schedule your EV recharging. Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. I'll keep whizzing through. And in future, consumers will have the potential to be paid, because remember, having got a battery and a solar, you essentially become a domestic power station. Okay, so even though you're a mini power station, through the power of software, we can actually add up hundreds of these power stations and turn them into one coordinated giant power station. And we can actually recruit you to allow your battery to provide grid support services or to discharge at times when a retailer, such as SIMEC ZEN, may say, I'm happy to purchase the response from your battery for this amount of money because I can value that within my retail book. Okay. Okay. So I'll move on to what this means for your business. What we have is, it's an early low momentum market. In rough numbers, this is focused on what we call small, medium enterprises. So these are typically businesses you might see in your high street, pharmacy, hairdresser, small bakery, cafe, and so on. And commercial industrial, which tend to be in an industrial estate, and they might make any number of different kinds of things. Or they might be an office building, such as this one, okay? Or a university, such as the Melbourne University precinct here. Nationally, we're not sure because no one's done a count, but I'd say somewhere between 50 or a bit more than that installs of the approximate size of about 100 to 200 kilowatts. So that's 10 times the size of a residential unit. And that the low-hanging fruit is in regional Queensland, and you'll see why shortly, and then in SA. It's a heterogeneous market, meaning it's very specific to the site and its load. Okay, and there are kinds of winery sort of included in that. Okay. What are the accelerants? Okay, rising electricity prices for sure. Where the site, rather than having a steady use through the day, it does this. That's actually good for battery economics. And whether there's a real or perceived supply reliability question. So if you happen to be if you're an iconic jam making brand in the Adelaide Hills and you're on the end of a long line, and you suffer blackouts 3 times a month, and your production line engineer has to go and restart that production line, then that's got a huge impact on your business. So they're having batteries that can both save you money on your operational bill, but provide some level of safeguarding for maintaining production, becomes of good value. The impediments to this are that it's a complex cell. There's a lack of market demonstration. So there's not many systems that business decision makers can go and look, see, touch, and feel. And that the economics are still sort of marginal. And that also, like Resi, the many of these businesses are in leased premises. So that makes you have the same sort of split incentive problem. The complex cell is that the way you specify the battery for the site is technically quite involved, and traditionally the engineers get involved in defining that, and they do a great job, and they go, yes, we want to buy this really expensive system, and then they go to the business head or the financial controller, and the financial controller goes, I don't know what that means. Please explain it in plain English. And the engineer goes, well, I don't know how to do that. So and that's speaking from, that's channeling personal experience. So so you can see that it's not as straightforward. Whereas for the Resi, essentially you, the homeowner, can grasp enough of the technical aspects to then make your own business decision, right? So, but not so when you deal with a in this domain. I might skip these and go straight to this one here. So, you know, I'll just, can I go back? Yes. Okay, I'll just touch on this one. So what happens with a business is that, I'll start with Resi, because that's probably your point of reference. Your electricity bill's got a $1 a day supply charge, and then you get charged 24 cents or whatever it is for all the electricity you use, no matter when you use it or how you use it, right? Not so for a business. What happens with a business is they get charged for what's called maximum demand in kilowatts per month. So if that over the month, the business is doing that, and then on one day, they happen to turn on all 4 of their compressors, and they do that, they get charged at that ceiling, okay? And so this difference here in those 2 lines, so that top line's worth, that they pay $9,000 a month for their demand, maximum demand. And if they can reduce their spikes, that comes down to $7,000 a month. So there's $3,000 of value to be grabbed there. And what the battery is used for in these cases is to shape those peaks. And so the pointier the peaks and the fewer of them that cause that maximum demand to top out, the more attractive that site becomes for battery peak shaving. That's probably the sort of key message to take away. I'll skip that one. And then, so what this maps is that demand charge I just mentioned across jurisdictions, it ranges from about $5 per kilowatt per month through to about $40 per kilowatt per month. And here we're going to get the battery to do 2 things. This time of use delta is similar to what the battery does in your house. So it's shifting, it's harvesting electricity when the prices are low, and it's discharging the battery when the prices are high. And that difference, the bigger the difference, the more it improves the battery economics. And so on this axis, I've plotted the range that we typically encounter for business tariff structures. So you can see that the payback frontier, which is this one here. So best. So you can see the payback frontier lies where you have the highest time of use delta and the highest demand charge at 5-6 years, heading in that direction, okay? And then we map each of the jurisdictional markets on that, And we find that Queensland is the hot market. So in some sites, you're getting 7-8 year payback because you're getting slapped with very high demand charges. And so a lot of the deployments are occurring in Queensland now. South Australia is sort of coming into that frontier, and WA as well, with New South Wales probably furthest behind. So that gives you a feel for where commercial battery deployments will be occurring in the next few years. So in summary then, for businesses, typical outlay, several $100,000. And that will give you a system of about, 150 kilowatts, 2-hour system. If you need blackout protection, that helps the business case. And the payback is in the 12 to 18 year range, and that will give you a saving on your annual bill of 10 to 20%. SIMEC ZEN has commissioned this year 4 of these systems for the South Australian government at the Adelaide High School, the Art Gallery, and 2 other buildings. And that's a demonstration project where we have installed batteries behind the meter to perform these functions. Yeah, okay. So good sites. Probably the one to point out, yeah, schools, hotels, small manufacturing premises are good. Hospitals, shopping centers, universities are also good because they've got very sort of variable load patterns through the day. Okay, so that was everything on the small business end of things. I'm now going to move to talk about grid-connected large batteries, and here I'll take you through a quick tour of the global view and then where Australia sits within that, and then give you a market outlook trend around that.
Before we go to that,
yep.
Would you be able to say something about the blackout protection?
Yep.
What's the best level of charge to be maintained as the minimum charging level?
Yeah, okay. So for
I've got a domestic system.
You've got a domestic system.
That's
okay.
That's fine.
Yeah. Okay. So it's the entry level of blackout protection is that you have whatever the remaining charge in your battery happens to be fortuitously available to give you a ride through. You can program in a minimum holding state of charge, but obviously then that means you may have to buy additional battery capacity to have that. So for my house, I allow 3 hours of ride through, and I don't program in any minimum state of charge, but I know that my battery, it's quite predictable. You can see from your daily trend, if you do get a battery, that mine doesn't drop below 50% state of charge. So at any given point of time, I know I will have a certain minimum reserve, which will give me the cover that I need. So that's how you would think about that. Okay. Right. How am I doing for time? 32. Right. So I'll finish up in about 5, and then we can go to Q&A. Okay, good. Okay, this is one for the geeks. Now, we kind of wonder, well, there's all these storage technologies out there. Why is it that lithium batteries have become such a dominant force? And there's many factors to it. And this slide is to give you a bit of appreciation of why, or the next few slides, okay? So energy storage, we can map the universe of energy storage through what we call a power energy continuum, shown here. And on this axis, this is the power that can be put out by a typical technology shown in these bubbles. And note, this has 6 orders of magnitude on it. Okay, so it's not a linear scale. And on the x-axis is the amount of energy stored. And this has 6 orders of magnitude on it, okay? And what we see from pumped hydro up here is that it can store hundreds of megawatts or gigawatts of power and discharge it at hundreds of megawatt hours of energy. So the very, very big things. But they're confined to location. So you can only put in a pumped hydro if you have the topography to allow that to happen. At the other end of the scale, you've got high-speed flywheels, which can store, shall we say, hundreds of kilowatts or up to a megawatt of power, but they can only do that for hundreds of seconds or minutes. And then this bubble here is for lithium, essentially lithium batteries. And what they can do is store energy for sort of in the megawatt range, and in fact scalable down to your smartphone's got a lithium battery in it, so down here in terms of power, and sort of down to this end of the thing here is like probably the button cell in your iPhone wristwatch thingy. And then now we have the Tesla Hornsdale battery, which has 100 megawatts of power in it. So that's sort of heading towards that end. These envelopes are not meant to describe the full technology scalability. Rather, they describe the techno-economic sweet spot for where you would tend to use each of these technologies. Okay. And so why the current dominance of lithium? So that comes down to 3 things: what I call learning curve superiority, versatility, and ubiquity, meaning commonly occurring. And batteries, for the use that we're talking about today, it's the 3rd industrial use. It's really riding on the coattails of success in 2 other uses that precede it. And they are laptop computers, such as we have here, and electric vehicles. Those are the 2 industries that are driving the pace of reduction in battery costs. So stationary batteries, they're just riding on the coattails of doing that, okay? So they're gonna be hard to catch. Versatility, well, we've just spoken, you can put them in-house, you can put them in business, or you can build a giant one and bolt it onto the grid. So that kind of versatility is just incredible. And finally, ubiquity. This means it's not tied to site, it's portable, and it's fast to deploy. And it comes out of a portable electronics paradigm, okay? So these are the 3 things that really lead to lithium being dominant. Taking the global market outlook then, these are the countries that in the Deloitte report are leading the sort of adoption of grid batteries. And in particular, these countries have strong leadership. And well, I should add Australia into that pack, and we'll see why on the next slide, which is that this is the projected growth in storage deployment over the next 10 years, starting in 2018. And what we have is the US in that yellow trace as a grid battery pioneer, and they were the first country to recognize that to balance the electricity system. Kate, how many here attended Kate Summers's talk last month? Anyone did? Yeah, it's an amazing translation of geek talk into plain language. And what the US did was they understood that traditional thermal generators have to maintain a lot of headroom in case the load changes, because they need a large headroom because they can move relatively slowly. But the battery can jump out of bed if there's a grid disturbance before the thermals have even noticed it. And that's what's happening in South Australia now with the Hornsdale battery. So the US put in place a policy to recognize the premium value of the fast-acting nature of that battery, and off goes that market, and that's really set the pace. South Korea is doing this for a slightly different reason. LG, Samsung, popular sort of white goods domestic appliance brands that you know and love. They're a powerhouse in making grid batteries and market leader. So there, it's to that leadership allows them to consolidate their manufacturing leadership. So it's driven by the industry development policy. So they're busily modernizing their own grid, and last year they deployed half the world's grid battery capacity, and next year they stand to do the same. I'll skip past Japan. India is driven more by an EV focus than stationary energy generation, because India didn't lay down a countrywide sort of interconnected grid system like we did in Australia. They've got a more sort of dispersed system. And finally, Australia, although we have the smallest population, that's that series of green, blue dots, that blue line there, we are punching above our weight, and we are the amazing outsized sandpit. Okay, so the accelerators then are that there are technology improvements, that there's a global shift to renewables. All these countries are busily modernizing their grid, and some are taking policy leadership to promote the deployment of grid batteries. The other two sort of drivers are that as solar feed-in tariffs phase out, then we'll see more residential uptake. And there's obviously a desire for self-sufficiency by prosumers. Okay, I'll skip that one as well. Okay, last two slides. Okay, so finally, I'll give you a view of the Australian market status. We have about 400 megawatts operational, under construction, or deployed. This one here at Gina Reinhardt's mine in the Pilbara, I think. It's there for mine site standalone power, where you have traditional engine-based generation, a big chunk of solar, and the battery is there to really balance the whole system in the short term. Okay. This one here is quite at the other end of the spectrum. That's up at Cape, north of Cairns, and that's a 4-hour system. This is a 20-minute system. That 4-hour system, if the distribution wires are lost, because there are very long lines hanging off that battery can island and continue supplying the remote outlying loads. So it's about distribution reliability on that one. And then here's where all the action's happening around here. So we see a whole rash of batteries that are under operation. The Tesla battery is sort of up through here. And SIMEC ZEN is developing a battery as well in the Upper Spencer Gulf. So it's a 100 megawatt system that's been announced. Okay, so you can see there's sort of a lot happening here in Australia. Here's okay. Oh. Okay, that'll probably do because it won't let me go back. Can I just want to get up that last slide. Yeah. Can you do that? Yep, that one. All right. Okay. So if we break down by use case the previous two slides, what you see is that the South Australian government has written a contract to provide support services through the Tesla battery. 3 of the projects are about wind and solar firming. So what that means is those independent power producers of wind and solar large scale into the network can use a battery to even out the intermittency of their output, and that the Australian market doesn't quite yet value that firmness. In California, you're paid 1.2 times premium if you have firm solar. In Australia, whether your solar is firmed or not, you get 1.0, but that'll change. And network support, that was one of the batteries on the York. And then what we call energy market hedging. So this is Energy Australia and SIMEC ZEN. So we will use the battery. We're a solar sourced retailer. And of course, the solar production does that, but our customer load does that. If we want to minimize the amount of energy market risk we take in firming up that solar to match that load, then we use the battery as a defensive physical hedging device to protect ourselves against times when the spot market has very high prices in it. And finally, the Bolgana Energy Hub is more a demonstration of wind coupled together with storage behind the meter. That's the end.
Yeah. Thanks, Terry, for the fantastic talk. Yes. Very nice talk and pretty amazing.
Okay.
So now the floor is open for questions. So before asking any questions, so please state your name and affiliation. And as you're running a bit late, and keep the question short. So thanks. So who will be the first question here? Okay. Okay. We got the first
yes,
one.
I'm Hans Speer in the School of Social and Political Sciences. While I'm all for renewable energy, I guess my concern is if, let's say, you had these grid batteries in all the residences, industries, businesses, what have you, in the world, would there be enough resources to sustain this? For example, you mentioned lithium, and I understand lithium is in somewhat short supply, or is a resource that we will run out of. So how do we grapple with that sort of limited resources that we actually have in the world that it would take to develop these batteries?
Yes, it's a very good question, and it ones that speaks to, I guess, at the highest level, the model for human civilization, consuming resources beyond the carrying capacity of the planet, and that we are now running at 3.5 planets over our allowance across the globe, with the first world countries consuming probably 5 or 6 planets worth. I'm sure you've got a better handle on those numbers than I do, so please forgive me if I have those wrong, with the developing world consuming half a planet on average. So within that, if we are to change our model of consumption, then the push towards renewables doesn't absolve our guilt. We are still consuming. So we need to consume less while moving towards more renewable sources. Within that, then, you're right to point out that batteries or renewables will have a demand on mineral extraction, on water, on the use of the environment in terms of impacts and everything. So we need to weigh those up in our choices, right? If it's just a question of lithium scarcity, then obviously if we reach limits on lithium availability, that will drive battery prices back up. It's too early to tell whether there's a limit there to be broached. If it's a question of environmental consequences of resource extraction, then yeah, I think we need to weigh that up as an industry and as individuals to choose to make our consumption choices around what causes least harm. But renewables and batteries are not harm-free. So it's always a case of what is my choice, which is least harm.
Yeah, sir.
Kishore Dapke, Monash University. Kishore Dapke, Monash University, Electrical and Computer Systems Engineering. So this is a mundane but geeky question. Are some of these slides going to be made available to people who wish to examine them in greater
Yeah,
detail.
yeah, sure. And the whole presentation is on the web, so you will
Is it?
get it
Okay.
on the web as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Excellent talk, by the way.
Yeah.
Well,
Next
thank you.
questions. Okay.
Barry, my name's Weston Lewis with HVH Sustainability. I'm just wondering, now that you have your data from your home system, battery and PV, would you have designed it any differently?
Not really, but we're not your average household because we're already at a very low energy consumption base. So the perspectives I presented there were more for the average house. And by the way, I live around the corner from HVH.
Next questions. Yes. Okay. Just wait for the mic.
Thank you, Terry. David Brockway was previously Chief of Energy Technology
yeah.
and CSIRO. What's the average life of lithium batteries? My understanding is it's about 10 to 12 years, which means that while they're viable for households, for SMEs, they're really not going to be viable until the price comes down a lot.
Yes, that's right. It's nice to meet you again, David. So the frontier of warranted design life for lithium batteries is 15 years. So that's being, large projects are being financed on the basis that the batteries will last 15 years, and therefore my economic model for planning and investing in those large assets can go out to 15 years. The further out you can go, then you improve the economics through a longer plan life. And then the financing sits inside that 15 years. So the point you're making is that the payback, if it's at 20 years, has to come back within 15 years. Otherwise, it's not worth doing. And that's absolutely right.
Next question, please. Any? Okay.
Supplementary question to follow the first question. We are only talking about lithium, but there are other technologies evolving which will make energy storage using different chemicals, etc., which might be abundantly available.
Yes. So what we call lithium batteries collectively, there are many subclasses of how you put the compounds together that go inside the battery. So just as for solar PV, there is an efficiency frontier based on semiconducting materials with refinements in how you use that, and then ultimately there'll be a fundamental limit on how far you can go with semiconductor, and then you need to move to different kind of technology to get efficiency gains. So for lithium batteries, we are now at the feature size which is close to the smallest that you can get inside the battery, and the Coulombic efficiency, which is the chemical reaction and that takes the electrons, converts it chemically, and then push it back, is close to 100%. And that the efficiency of the battery, once all the terminals are put together and then you connect to the outside, so there are not many gains to be made there. So we're already seeing lithium reaching certain fundamental limits inside the battery, but with the use of innovation around the compounds that are used, then there are further efficiency gains to be made. So we'll move from this kind of energy density to, a lot more energy density at a lower cost.
And not using lithium.
And potentially not using lithium, yes, correct.
Okay. Yeah, please. Yeah.
John Hill, and I'm just a private individual with a few solar cells on my house. A couple of questions. How big is your battery at your particular house?
4 kilowatt hours.
4 kilowatt hours. And my other question is regarding supercapacitors. Is that a technology that you see taking over from lithium, particularly with the use of graphene?
So I'm not a technology expert, but on that graph that I put up of the power and energy continuum, supercapacitors have a definite role to play, and it seems to be more in the very high power, short duration continuum. And that means frequency stabilization on microgrids and those kinds of applications that will be its sweet spot. But I'm happy to defer to those in the room who may have more knowledge on the technology frontier.
Mr. Gentleman. Oh.
Keir Hamilton, private individual. Can the energy stored in these battery units be transferred at all?
So who was asking the question?
At the back.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Can the energy produced or stored in these battery units be transferred? Let's say from a household who hasn't got such high demand, transferring it to a neighbor or perhaps an investment property that stores these and can transfer it to a high demand household.
That's a very good question. So the way the electricity market is designed right now, if you export your surplus electricity through your meter onto the wires, across and then back into your neighbor, neither of you really gets the benefit of that. The retailer who controls your meter and theirs essentially captures all that value from the surplus. So essentially commercially, you can't do that in the example I've given. However, there are now apartment blocks that are saying we can introduce metering arrangements underneath the master meter import into the block of apartments, and we will be able to share our solar in the way that you've just described. And there's a groundbreaking company that's doing that using blockchain technology in Perth, and they happen to be called Power Ledger. I don't work for Power Ledger. Yeah. You may also Google Sun Tenants, which is another company that's looking at how to do solar sharing.
Yeah, sure.
John Scallon, Planet Arc Power. Thanks for the presentation. It was very good. What do you see the role of behind the meter commercial and industrial scale, I'll call microgrids, so battery and solar, in the formation of our NEM 2.0, whatever we're going to? Where do you see that all going?
Yeah, okay. So what the gentleman's referring to is that if we move to decentralized topography, there's a question over whether you would start to disconnect pockets of the grid, and is there a case to turn them into microgrids that stand on their own? So I think that, and that a large commercial premises in regional Victoria with a big chunk of solar and batteries could form the nucleus of such a concept. What sort of outlook would there be for that, I think is what I'm being asked. So my feeling there is that the fringe of the grid will tend to remain connected onto the grid, but dwellings and new builds that would face a high new connection cost to get onto the grid now have a legitimate alternative, which is to go to freestanding power. In terms of precincts which are grid connected but microgrids separable, I think that's early days and in the domain of demonstration. I don't have a firm view as to whether those concepts would take root more broadly. Yeah.
Yep.
Norman Rayburn, I'm a private citizen. The two questions, if I may. The first one, in the conversation a week or so ago, there was an article that suggested that if you straight line project the development of wind and solar, that in about another 10 years, Australia will have 50% of its electrical energy needs being provided by those renewables. In that context, are you aware of anybody having done any work whatsoever on the impact of transferring heat energy into other forms of energy on the parameters of global warming?
Transferring, so I understood the first bit, but not the last bit. What's the reference to heat energy?
Well, if we're taking, if the production of energy by solar means is as it were, extracting energy from that heat.
Okay. Okay.
And turning it into other forms of energy.
Mm-hmm.
Is that has anybody done any work on potential impact on global warming rates?
On global warming rates?
Yes.
Okay, because we're harvesting a significant proportion of the incident solar radiation that lands on the planet.
Yes.
I'm not aware of such work. Obviously, the heat balance has to be maintained. So the insulation that lands on a PV panel, it's a conversion device, not a consumption device. So it converts it into electricity, but when that electricity is applied to load, it has to be released as work, either mechanically, electrically, or heat, or otherwise. So that's conservation of heat.
It's conservation of energy, but if it's released as work, surely a significant proportion of it is not released as heat.
Yeah, so that's a question for a physicist.
Yeah.
So I have to sidestep
I do
that
understand
question.
that. I just wondered whether you. And the second question was, are you aware of the Bruny Island pilot program?
Only peripherally.
Yeah.
Okay, we don't have much time, so please keep your questions short, and we have maybe one questions for now.
Thank you very much. Joe Gomery, private citizen.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Joe Gomery, private citizen. My question is, what are the health, safety, hazard, and recycling concerns with battery technology?
Great question, thank you. So without alarming you, a battery is actually a slow-moving bomb. So it contains a lot of energy in it, okay? But remember that you're walking around with that slow-moving bomb in your pocket right now. Okay, it's a smaller amount, but it's the same inherent technology. I'm going to walk away from sort of distance myself from that device there. So no, without being flippant, yeah, that's and you may be aware of the more publicized I guess events in the news. I think one of the Airbuses had a lithium battery that caught fire. So obviously the consequences of that going wrong at 30,000 feet is quite, not to be laughed at. So what's happening here is that battery safety is being looked at very, very carefully through regulation. And for example, you cannot transport a battery with more than 30% charge in it. And in fact, you're not allowed to pack your, what do you call it? Power bank? Yeah. In your check-in luggage, you have to carry it. So you can see that there's this awareness that battery, these lithium batteries are a risk. There's also a shift to lithium iron phosphate batteries. So there they do a nail penetration test, and they do all sorts of really nasty things to this battery. And inherently, it cannot catch fire and do a thermal runaway. Whereas there are other kinds of lithium batteries which can thermally run away. So there's this learning and awareness that's going on in the industry to deal with the risk as a very real issue. For industrial use, I think batteries get deployed in larger quantities. So there's work to be done to make sure that those safety parameters still operate correctly. For consumer appliances, well, you will see that manifest through rules such as don't carry your power bank in your check-in luggage.
I wasn't particularly thinking about, say, household fires.
Yep. So the code right now is that if you buy a battery, you have to put a sticker on your meter box identifying the chemical compounds that are inside the battery. And then the standard protocol for the MFS is that there isn't a register, but there is a process where they check your meter box for the sticker, and they will apply the right retardant if there's a fire in your house. The data to date is more about how does the battery manage itself in the face of a fire caused elsewhere, rather than the battery being the source of the fire itself. But noting that the risk of the battery being the source of fire itself is also something that we should consider, that is a possibility.
Last question. Okay.
Yeah, is the will to adopt science much stronger than the respect for science?
Well, I don't know how to answer that.
A lot of people like Gina Reinhardt are very happy to adopt the to adopt the science, but they don't really have any respect for it.
That's an interesting comment. I'll take that as a comment. Yes.
One quick question for me.
Please.
Do you think about like some kind of multi-stack service for your battery? Because right now you're using only for the peak shaving, but the retailers essentially kind of collect all this residential battery and play in the market, like kind of arbitraging the price.
Yep. So that so who here has heard of the term virtual power plant? Can I just have a show of hands? Thank you. Is anyone here participating in a VPP trial? No one. Okay. So a virtual power plant is what I referred to right at the opening, where we can take the solar and batteries from hundreds of dwellings and use software to staple them together and take control of those batteries, and suddenly you've got a lever that can affect the market. So there are probably about 5 trials going on right now in Australia, one in the ACT, one in South Australia by AGL, and there's a few others. So that will point the way eventually to the aggregation of these services from households behind the meter, and we will end up. So here's the vital point here. The old paradigm thinks about we need base load. That's the only way we can guarantee that supply will be there. We're now moving to a reconstruction of that paradigm, which is that an energy system, of course, can't store power, but the way you maintain its balance is by the ability to add or subtract generation and by the ability to add or subtract load. And that those two things coming together essentially render the concept of base load irrelevant. And that this question points to the pathway where virtual power plants will enable you to do that.
Okay, unfortunately we have to stop here right now, and if you have any more question, he'll be here for 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so welcome to joining me and we do have an amazing talk next week, 27th, on blockchain and energy. It will be done by Dr. Sutter from Switzerland, so I hope you will all join there. No problem. Yeah, you'll get all information on the website. Thanks very much.